Hello and welcome to our Q&A for Barry Jenkins miniseries, The Underground Railroad. My name is Chris Lemaire and I'm a programmer at the American Cinematheque. And it's my great pleasure to present this conversation with 6 members of the creative team that helped to bring this incredible story to life. And that includes the star, Thuso Mbedu, editor, Joi McMillon, cinematographer, James Laxton, hair designer, Lawrence Davis, makeup designer, Doniella Davy, and the costume designer, Caroline Eselin. Before we jump in, I just want to send a quick thank you to Amazon Studios just for making this event happen. And also, as always, I want to send a big thank you to our amazing American Cinematheque members that are tuning in for your continued support. So now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, writer and film critic, Beandrea July.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm really excited about this conversation. So often it's the subtleties that come from the departments like hair, costume, makeup, the editing choices, the cinematography choices that really make a work like Underground Railroad stand out. And I think that's definitely the case here. And especially with the lead character, Thuso Mbedu, plays the wonderful Cora, who's the main through line of the series. I think these departments in particular really help to craft a character that feels complete and feels completely engrossing. So let's get it started. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you all about this wonderful project, The Underground Railroad, now on Amazon Prime. And, you know, people, the key collaborators on a team are, you know, can be what make or break a project, right? And it all starts from the director. And you all have, by all accounts, a wonderful director, a person who is wonderful to work with. So I wonder if we could just start there with talking about your collaboration with Barry. Take us back to when you first became involved in the project, when you first signed on, and those early conversations with Barry about how to shape Cora. And let's start with James.
Well, I guess because I've known Barry since I was like 20, I sort of feel like, I always feel like when we work together, you know, I've had like a 20-year pre-production period. So like, you know, everything we're talking about is sort of baked into conversations that have sort of trickled into the friendship and trickled in through the filmmaking collaboration process from kind of a long time ago. So I have a little bit of like a, you know, a cheat card, so to speak, of just like knowing Barry for that long and having a bit of a shorthand and a trust and a sort of a, you know, just a lovely collaborative relationship that goes back quite a long way. So that's the background basically. And then particular to this project, you know, I sort of think I started hearing about the beginnings of it sort of around the end of our previous film, If Beale Street Could Talk. And sort of that was when it was just conceptually, the idea was maybe we would be in Atlanta in a couple of years filming this, which of course, thank goodness it happened. And that's what we were up to. Anyway, so that's the background of it all. And yeah, it was a wonderful sort of experience, but you know, that was sort of the backstory for me anyway.
Yeah, and Joi, you've also known the director for a long time as well.
I was 18 though, I wasn't 20. I'm not as old as James. But yes, I too, you know, known Barry for quite some time. And I think it's like everyone always, you know, questions like, when do we know about something? But I feel like with Barry, we're just always constantly talking about projects and it just depends on which one goes at which time. But specifically to this, you know, that was one of the things that was really important to us while we were in the edit, is shaping the story of Cora and making sure that the audience, from that first cut to her in the opening of chapter 1, you know, the importance of being with her and connecting with her and investing in her story. And that's one of the things that throughout each episode, we made sure that Cora was the focal point, even if the story wasn't specifically about her in that episode. We're always checking back in with her and making sure that the audience, you know, is in step with her in her journey.
Yeah, yeah. And Caroline, tell us about what kind of direction you got from Barry around the costuming.
Kind of in the year and a half leading up to prep, I would see Barry here and there, and I would just ask him quick questions, like we were during Beale Street or like sort of screenings or things like that. I just kind of grab him for a second and say, well, you know, what do you think this period? Do you think what period we might be in this episode? Or I just gather these sort of bits as we went along, and then when we went into prep in February of 2019, that's when really we started to shape things and figure out what periods we are, and started talking about Cora. But it kind of happened gradually over. I mean, it was same with me after Beale Street. We were finishing Beale Street in the Dominican Republic when Barry first spoke to me about it, and so from that moment on, like that prep began. You just like, I read the book immediately and just immersed myself in like my default setting was the Underground Railroad. Every moment I could get. I did one movie in between, and then every other moment I had was in research, and you know, a lot of nights of insomnia. Of, you know, it was big.
Yeah. And then can I interject just like a random piece of information? Caroline was actually one of the first people that I met after getting the role. Was like a few days later, and she had like ideas and stuff, and I'm like, I haven't read the script. I don't. She was asking me, so what do you think we should do for? I'm like, I have no clue. She was amazing. She was super nice.
Can I tell Thuso that moment that we had at Western Costume when you first came in and we started to try on shapes, and Thuso just sort of kind of had like was overcome for a moment, and as we were trying on things, and she kind of sat down for a second and just said, this is really happening.
Yeah.
This moment to witness. I couldn't, you know, I remember talking about that when we finally wrapped, when we finally, you know, after COVID and everything, I kind of remembered that moment, and what a big moment that was for you. And
it really was. I think
was, you know,
seeing the ideas and, you know, getting into what they had made it feel real, because now I'm feeling the fabric of the reality of my character. Was. And so Caroline was one of the first that I met, and she was amazing.
Yeah. I want to get into that a little bit more, but I want to get Doniella and Lawrence's voices in the conversation just up top.
Yes.
Doniella, I know Lawrence, you're one of the few people who this is your first time working with Barry, right? Whereas I know Doniella, you worked on Moonlight, of course, and
Lawrence was a newbie.
Yeah. So how was that? You know, how was it as a quote unquote newbie to this collaborator?
You know, it was great because when I spoke with Barry, it was almost like we were just old friends talking about, you know, something that we've always talked about. But being the new kid on the block was pretty easy. Everybody welcomed me with open arms, and I just felt the connection right away. And I would say what helped me was once I saw what Caroline brought to the table, it kind of helped me, like a light bulb went off in my head, and I had an idea, like, okay, this is what Cora needs to look like. And it ushered in everything and every idea from there. Just visiting the costume department. That was my green light right there. Thanks, Caroline.
Yeah. And Doniella, was that the case for you too? I imagine, let's just go right into it. I imagine that hair, makeup, and costume collaborated a ton, as well as, of course, with James and his cinematography. But tell us about, you said that Caroline really inspired you, Lawrence. How did that happen for you, Doniella? Were you inspired by hair, makeup, costume, all of that?
So I feel like my department, sort of makeup and hair departments, come on pretty close to when we're about to start filming. So we do a lot of like learning and figuring stuff out on the fly with Barry, with Thuso, with the other actors. Sort of, it's hard to kind of figure out a whole plan before we start. So much about makeup, I think, is so fluid and it changes. And because, you know, emotions and whatnot are always changing, the makeup can always change a little bit too. So I feel like I'm lucky kind of like that. Like I can sort of, I have a little bit of freedom and fluidity. I don't have to necessarily like nail it on the first day. So a lot for me happens like even weeks into shooting, I'll finally figure out, oh, if I do this on Thuso's face, it totally just, you know, strips something away from her. If I do this, it makes her look more like healthy and hopeful, and maybe that's better for her when she's sort of feeling safer in this part of her journey. So but yeah, when I first come onto a project, I look to the costume designer, which in my case, I've been lucky to work with Caroline so many times. I often am looking to her for guidance in the beginning, and then production design too, I find really fascinating to check in and see you know, just what like interiors of rooms are looking like. Somehow that seems to help me, I don't know, understand and get inspired. So yeah, I'm lucky that the work is like kind of already, the world is established by the time I come on board. So I just have to fit right in.
Yeah, it definitely sets the tone.
Yeah.
And you really have a specialty, in my mind, you have a specialty in working with melanated skin tones, which...
Thanks.
Yeah. And I mean, people often comment on, you know, Moonlight, for example, is a great example. But even here, especially here in Underground Railroad, I think that, you know, you have this beautiful cast of actors, and but they're
such a great group.
Yeah, and they're going through kind of hell, you know, so they don't always look, you know, they look like it sometimes. And
right, and then Barry really wanted to bring out the beauty as well in some of these moments. Like he's like, okay, well, they should look distressed and it's kind of fucked up, but like I need them to look beautiful too. So it was all about like finding, oh, and then sometimes he'd be like, Thuso looks too good. And I'm like, God, I only put like the tiniest bit of like tinted foundation on her. And he's like, okay, well, she looks too good, take it down. So yeah.
I remember that.
In the grapevines. And I realized it because I did put a different foundation on you, and he could really, and it was just a light application, but he knew. So Barry has a very trained eye, and I got to work with him really early on in my career on Moonlight. So yeah, I think I learned a lot with him early on, and just, you know, about being subtle. And, you know, I think everybody's skin is really, really different. I don't think I have any like rules, you know, about like dark skin versus light skin. It depends on what Barry wants or what the director wants, and everyone's skin is like I said, it's different. So there's not really a formula. It's just about sort of showing that realism, and then with the other work I do, like subtle character work and whatnot, that's just about like emotional realism, which Barry's really into, as well as realism and period accuracy, but he's more into like emotional accuracy for the moment. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, and Thuso and Lawrence, I was rewatching the series, and I was really struck by Cora's look from episode 1 to episode 2, where she goes into this whole other space. You know, her hair goes from being natural, and she has like what you created, her characteristic sort of refined pigtails, I would call them. And then she has, you know, her straight look, and she's like balls. And tell us about how you approached putting that together, that transition.
Again, I was inspired by Caroline. Once I saw what Thuso was going to be wearing, and once I knew the storyline and that the women had straight hair, you know, it was the first time for her. I just knew what I had to do to bring that whole look together. Even when she was under the hat, you know, the hair had to be visible and visibly straight, because that's the way they wore it. So I was always inspired by the costume, always.
Sure. And I mean, it must have been hard for you because, you know, like Doniella was saying, like you have to let them look like they're suffering. But someone like you, where you know, styled so many glamorous movie stars, it must be hard to let them look, you know, the way they need to look.
That part is really hard for me, because and the right hand is saying, no, my mind is saying mess her up, and my right hand is saying fix her up. So it's a struggle there. You know, there's this moment where I just have to step away and say, that's it, just leave her alone. you know, so it's not so groomed and so put together. But yeah, it is a struggle.
Right. Yeah. That editing. And Caroline, since you know, Lawrence and Doniella and others have mentioned how much you inspired them. I really loved your work in this too. I think that, you know, I'm not a sartorial expert, but I think there was something about that horizontal line in a lot of what Cora was wearing that to me was like symbolic of her journey through the series, and also just, you know, like the railroad itself. And I wonder if you could talk about like what was your key like inspiration, or sort of what was your focus statement around when you put together the clothing?
Well, it was, Cora's costumes are dictated by every state she escapes to. We did things very methodically, as far as where would she have gotten her clothes from and what would happen on the journey to her clothes. So there was everything, you know, we had reasons for all the choices all the way through of what Cora would wear. I mean, starting in Georgia, you know, it was going back to like, well, the cotton gin was well in use by, you know, 1850. And so probably Cora's clothes in the plantation were probably from those fields of cotton, and they were probably hand-me-downs. And some of her pieces or her dresses were from 1840s, late 1830s. And then, you know, just hand-me-downs. And so the one thing that really, that thematically that carried through the whole series was, honestly, and very fittingly so, was it was about restraint and about limits. And it's slavery is chasing her all the way through. And those choice, you know, there wasn't much, she didn't have choices in every state until she gets to Indiana. And still, you know, there's a timidness in Indiana in the beginning, because she doesn't know if she's going to be able to stay, if they're going to vote her to stay or vote her out. And so it's sort of more blending into, you know, the environment there. But there's a whole sort of journey of what Cora goes through, you know, in her clothing from Georgia to South Carolina. You know, in South Carolina, the clothes that our Black community wears is, Barry wanted to treat it like a prison, and Cora's issued a day dress and an institutional dress, and the men are issued workwear in their suits. And then Barry is he's so wonderful at playing a costume. He is such a great storyteller through costume that I think at one point in the script, Homer was going to find Cora in maybe her dressing room, and she would have been in her day dress or her institutional dress. But Barry, it ended up being, she was in the diorama in the cotton field box, and she is once again in a slave dress, in a Disney-fied version of a slave dress, and has to escape South Carolina in that slave dress. So once again, you know, that's put on. And then when she arrives in North Carolina, she's once again issued clothes, and she's issued the Wells daughters hand-me-downs that are in the attic, and it's their children's dresses. And those dresses carried her through Tennessee, which was kind of this, you know, great visual of, and, you know, horrific, that Bridgeway's sort of dragging her through Tennessee and childlike, like a doll, you know, through Tennessee in these short dresses, which she wouldn't have worn at the time. And then when we get to Indiana, she has finally, we think that those dresses, maybe her first one comes from someone there on the farm, but then, you know, as things get better, like we have names for all the dresses, like her brown dress that she has her date with Royal, that's the brown date dress. Now, everybody in the department knows the brown date dress. Like, oh no, she's wearing the brown date dress. But she still only had 3 dresses, I believe, in Indiana. And those, again, and Barry all the way through, and this is working with Barry, it's always less is more, until it's not, but it's mostly like I would say a good rule of thumb would be less is more. And he would, you know, when you're designing a big show like this and you start putting things together, you need options to create the characters. So you build more than you need. You know, you have to sort of then have things to tell the story with, to fill things in, to, you know, see what works, what doesn't. And at one point, you know, in some places we'd have 3 or 4 dresses and Barry would be like, no, too many, take those down. Let's, no, she can only have this. And, you know, and Barry is great. I mean, from Moonlight to Beale Street to, you know, even Underground Railroad, he'll sit on the floor with me and plan out the whole, you know, the whole character, all the characters. We'll sit down and make boards of how everyone looks. And you know, we had so many meetings after meetings with Barry. I mean, like really, it's nonstop. And we would plan, you know, all the costumes all the way through, but particularly for Cora, like in Indiana. And at one point we had 4 or 5 dresses, and he, no, too many. So she has 3 dresses in Indiana. So it really was about restraint and limits, you know, all the way through, and fittingly so.
Yeah, I love that, because I think it's, you know, especially for costuming, but I can imagine it's true for makeup and hair too, that like, you know, you don't want to be the one who takes the audience out of the scene, right, with what you're doing, right? So
absolutely,
you're doing your
very
work
important
with pristine. I felt like it was all very pristine, and I personally didn't get taken out of it. If anything, I was like admiring.
And can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I arrived in Savannah like 2 months before the rest of the cast showed up, and so I had the opportunity to go, you know, see the wardrobe, consult with Donnie and Lawrence, and, you know, go through the sets and see the different sets. But it was a completely different experience being in those sets with now people and the background in full costume and hair and wardrobe, and makeup, where I had to mentally say, oh, this is too much for me as Thuso to take in. So let me keep my eyes down and only look up and take in the world as Cora, because of how all the departments came together so well.
By the way, if I can say, I tell you that we bothered, you know, Barry all the time. Poor Thuso. I was going back through in lockdown. I was going back through and archiving all of like fitting photos and going through stuff. And I just realized like how many fittings we had to do, how many, it was like, sometimes it felt like it was 1 a week, and she said, again, I'm so sorry. Lots of fittings.
I mean, I don't know if Thuso wants to respond to that or not, but
no, I was always excited because again, with every new like interaction, with every new appointment, I was seeing Cora through someone else's eyes, and that was a learning experience for me. You know, I'm taking her from the book, or from, you know, I'm developing her from material, but what I'm getting from the different departments isn't taking away from what I've developed. It's actually adding and bringing in new layers. So I was always more than excited to go see Caroline, to go see Donnie, the scar, like figuring out the scar, you know, where and how her scar sits, you know, to seeing Lawrence, how she carries her hair, because that informs who she is as a person as well, you know? Yeah.
And have you gone back and watched Thuso, or are you
I've watched it twice. I need to watch it again. The very first time I'd watched it, like before it came out, I was just criticizing my performance all the way through. And then the second time I watched it when it premiered, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing project. And then now I'm going to go back and study it technically.
Wow, that's a great segue to our cinematographer and our editor. I want to just mentally bookmark episode 9, Indiana Winter. I need to talk about that because that's like by far my favorite episode of the series. But I want to throw it to James. It sounds like you and Barry knew right away that you wanted to try and focus on setting up shots where there weren't cuts, where it was sort of allowing for a dreamlike kind of feel. Tell us how you arrived at that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that concept basically came from almost in a weird way, like a concern, actually, like almost like a fear that the story has this sort of metaphoric element of the you know, these steam engine trains underground, and I think with a different filmmaking hand, you know, it could have dipped into like this sort of, you know, science fiction or you know, too heavy into this sort of like, I don't know, crazy world creating, when really we wanted to have that obviously in the show clearly, but also have the show feel like it was rooted in a real reality and have the impact of the historical context feel as impactful as possible at the same time. So the concept came from this, you know, if we cut less, if we incorporate, you know, real actors with real trains arriving in a real station and see the camera sort of have all those elements in the same time, but also to extrapolate from that and just sort of, you know, seeing Bozeman getting shot in episode 5 and then panning from that gunshot to Cora's face reacting to that, and just sort of making these things feel as connected as possible and not letting them sort of dip into a filmmaking trickery or CGI or these different elements. I think it just sort of felt like we would still hold on to this sort of this mythological storytelling element, but while still feeling is rooted in the sense of reality at the same time. So it's sort of, for me, the cinematography was sort of, you know, battling both of these concepts and trying to make them sort of one thing.
Right, yeah. Thank you for those wide shots. I mean, incredible. Joi, I read that you cut 1 and 10 together, sort of side by side. I don't know if editing was happening while production was still going on or if you waited till the end, but so you could tell us that, but also like, tell us about that moment when it came together of like, okay, Cora is the through line and this is what we're doing. I think it was with Mabel. You tell us about that.
Yeah, so chapter 1 and chapter 10, most of chapter 10 takes place in the same location as chapter 1. And so that's why I was editing them both at the same time. And it was, you know, chapter 10, Mabel's story that informed us how integral she was in a part of Cora's journey. And so, you know, once we figured out how Mabel was going to be featured, we then realized, oh, we should try to weave her in throughout the rest of the series. And so like that chapter 1 moment where Ridgway and Cora meet for the first time, that flashback to Mabel wasn't scripted. It was something that we found when we're like, it's important for people to know who Mabel is and how much she does have an effect on how, you know, closed off Cora is in the beginning and how she slowly, you know, starts to open up. And so, yeah, that was one of the things that we figured out in the edit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think you had said that episode 9 was particularly challenging for you to cut. Tell us about that. Why was it really challenging?
I'm also probably sure it was challenging for all departments because it's just such a massive episode.
Yeah.
You know, Cora starts out pristine and falling in love, and by the end of it, you know, the whole place is burning down. And so it was, you know, it was a huge undertaking. And that's one of the things that made my job a lot easier is how well everyone did in their, you know, their own departments. And one of the things that James is talking about, a lot of featuring the characters in these long, you know, detailed shots is actually a little bit trickier to cut because when you're trying to move from one shot to the other, you don't want to take anyone out. You know, you don't want to, you know, basically undercut the suspense or take away from that moment of Royal and Cora finally coming together. And so it was one of those episodes where the tone, figuring out the tone of how it starts and how it ends is one of the things that we really, really focused on in the edit. So everything that we set up in the beginning, you know, paid off in the end.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Does anyone else want to talk about episode 9 or a particular episode that stood out for you in terms of, you know, it being challenging?
Episode 9, end of episode 9, and I think I've shared this story before. I was in an ADR session with Barry, just doing like the, you know, the sounds and the voices, and I hadn't seen how Joi had edited that montage with Ridgway having his whole monologue at the end. And I remember, because Barry was like, oh, so you have an idea of what it is that you're putting voice over. This is it. So he let me watch the sequence, and I actually forgot that I was there for ADR because I just started crying because of the impact of how Joi chose to put it together. It was amazing. It's yeah, mind-blowing.
Also, kudos to your performance, which was amazing. And also one of the things that we did in that episode is we actually pulled I remember some of the first images I saw were the camera tests that James and Barry shot. And some of those images that we actually utilized during the flashbacks is actually camera test footage that we incorporated into the film as well. So yeah.
Barry calls that
every scrap. What was that?
Barry calls that day zero. It's always in the shoot somewhere. The same thing happened on Hill Street too. We shot a camera test and it ends up in the movie. It's like you can't roll camera without it have somewhere coming into the edit somewhere.
Wow, I love that. I guess I wonder, throwing this out to everybody, when you look back now, I know production happened a while ago, and of course we've all had a really complex year and a half. What kind of stays with you from being on set or working on your particular, I don't know if you were on set, Joy, I imagine you weren't, or maybe you were, but even in the editing bay, like what kind of stays with you from working on this project?
I still remember the day that I actually came to set is the opening of Indiana Winter. And just seeing like when you watch the dailies, you can be like, oh, James was back there, and oh, I passed Donnie's tent was over here. It's like you kind of get a peek and peek behind the curtain as an editor, because usually you're just seeing what the camera sees. So it was kind of cool to receive dailies that I was on set for and be like, oh, that's cool. Like, yes, and there's Ridgeway. So I always love visiting set and getting to see everyone, and as they're working on production, because what you all do, I know I don't have the stamina for.
It's for crazy people.
Especially in the Savannah heat. The Savannah heat was brutal.
I feel like we built a stamina like this. We built a stamina. To answer your question, this is a project that stays with you for, I don't want to speak for everyone, but this is, it was one of the greatest challenges of my life. I will always look back on this. It will always be with me. I remember days, I remember moments, I remember personal feelings, I remember hard days to see and feel on set, and like it's indelible. I don't think it ever will leave me. It's a wash. Like every day these memories come up of being on set or the process, or it was a huge experience, a huge collaboration, a huge making. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, I'll tell you that, for me.
Yes. I agree.
I think that's really well said, Caroline.
Wow. It was huge.
And I think for me too, I would say to add to that, because I agree with everything Caroline just said, but also to add, like, I think as a department head, oftentimes you feel like you want to just like take control of your department and kind of wrestle it through the show. And I think what I realized through this experience specifically is how that's just you can't do that on shows like this. And you really end up relying on everyone around you. Everyone on this call right now relied on, but also everyone that's not on this call, like the crew, behind the scenes, and just the infrastructure that went into this was massive, and there's a lot of effort on everyone's part. And I think, the trust and the love that was shared throughout the set was really well felt. And I think without that, I would never have made it through, honestly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I remember when Moonlight came out and Barry talked about like just having to make the actors switch positions because there wasn't the cameras and there wasn't the resources to do all kinds of setups. So it's really exciting for me just as a viewer to see what you do with when you have full resources. I know because a lot of you have gone with Barry from project to project. Like, is there a difference now?
Not working with him. It's always, you feel this, sort of intimate, connective kind of relationship and collaboration. But the scope of this compared to like Moonlight, and I'm sure Medicine, James, and all of the shorts you did, it's night and day. Definitely.
Very different.
Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah. having two cameras is nice because the diner scene in Moonlight, that's all single camera. So matching your performances, making sure that, now I'm like, ooh, there's like 3 cameras going. This is nice.
luxury.
Look at us.
Yeah. And, I think it speaks to the quality of y'all's collaboration because sometimes, as you know, sometimes getting more money isn't always a blessing.
Very true.
But you made something that looks expensive and it is just really strong, so congratulations on that. I also wanted to ask, did any of you use I know Barry has talked about in press for Underground Railroad about the counselor on set. Now, obviously, you all are there to do a particular job, but we all know that the subject matter of U.S. chattel slavery is very heavy and complicated, depending on where you come from, what your experiences are. And so I wonder, did any of you go to the counselor, or how did you sort of reckon with the subject matter in doing your job?
Ooh.
I never went to see the counselor. Probably should have though. But yeah, it was like really, really tough to grapple with this part of our history in this country. I think part of that, inspires like emotion and purpose and like really wanting to be there and do the best job possible. But it was physically, mentally, and emotionally, for sure, by far the hardest thing I've ever worked on. And completely unforgettable. There's things you learn in school, and then you step foot into these places, and then you make a TV show about it with Barry Jenkins, who captures all the horror and all the beauty of it all. And yeah, it's really, really heavy. I think all of us felt that way, and it clearly to me went into the work.
Yeah.
I saw it in the actors, and I feel so privileged I get to like spend time, even if it's completely silent time, getting the actors ready and getting them into character. It's really meaningful.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
I thought it was wonderful that Amazon provided them. So hats off to them.
And I mean, you're kind of like, I've always said that, at least in my experience growing up, hairdressers are healers. So I know my mom was always in a better mood after she came back from the hairstylist. So I imagine that, you all, the external work that you all did created mental space as well for everybody.
I know that sometimes,
go ahead.
even in the hair trailer, knowing what the subject matter may be that particular day on set, sometimes it's just providing a quiet space before that happens. That's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you just have to know.
Right.
Like for me, I would go to the counselor. She came to me, but I get asked a lot of times like how I got through this, and the truth is, I was supported by every single person on that set. From the time Shanda or Robin fetched me at home, to me getting into hair and makeup, to then Carrie dealing with me with costumes, like to Tom, who's part of the camera department, sneaking popcorn to me. Like every single person on that set took great care of me, and I do not take it for granted. I will forever be grateful for that.
I love that you got Barry to do the wave too.
I
did. You gotta have those moments.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I feel the exact same way Thuso just said. That was exactly how I would put it too. And I would also just sort of add that, like, when the alarm clock rang at God knows what hour, 4:35 in the morning, I never didn't want to go to work. Like I always wanted to get there. Yeah. And I think it was kind of because I was still processing the show. I was, going through this experience and on a daily basis, having to sort of do some version of processing. And I think it was really important for me to see Thuso in the morning, and to see Barry and to see the other crew members. And that was sort of part of that process, was I think because we were dealing with such really beautiful people, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, and really like open people and just like caring people, that it was actually like, Well, I didn't talk to the counselor. I was counseled by, I think, everybody on the set,
Yeah.
you know, on some
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, definitely.
And it sounds like just having that person there was almost a therapeutic in and of itself.
Yeah.
It was available,
That's right.
even if you didn't
Just knowing
access it.
Just knowing.
Yeah.
When we went back to finish up, it was after, you know, it was September. We went late August, September. We got back, and you know, we had all been through lockdown and been through, you know, gone through George Floyd in the summer and uprisings, and you know, and Amazon brought back the counselor to us again when we were back, and crew came back, and there was a fair amount of PTSD from coming back out into the world from lockdown, and then also just from, you know, everything that had happened in the summer. So we were really, really grateful to have the counselor, Kim White, that's her name, to come back to us. And we would do, at that point, then we were on Zooms doing, you know, getting counseling. She wasn't on set with us, but we could Zoom into her if we needed her. And several people in my department, you know, talk to her. Definitely, it was a lot, you know, it was a big time.
Yeah,
we were all grateful she was there during production and out, and then again.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for just your terrific work on this series, and for being here today. If for the folks at home, if you haven't already, make sure you tune in on Amazon Prime to the series. I don't recommend binging it, but get through it. And definitely, if you don't get to episode 9, I don't want to hear what you have to say about the series because you haven't really seen it. Okay. That's just me, Beandrea. No one officially endorsing that. But thank you all so much for your great work. And yeah, thank you so much
for having us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great to see you guys.
So good to see you.
You too, Thuso.
Glad to see you, my friend.